Have it. Order, order. We now move on to an important debate about the local involvement in shale gas development. Before I call on Mark Menzies to move the motion, I would just like to say to all honourable members that this debate lasts only 1 hour and will finish at 5:30. There are lots of members in the chamber, and I'm sure lots of contributions wish to be made. I'm very keen for everyone to have their say. I warn members now that the time limits for speeches is likely to be extremely short, and as a sign of courtesy from one member to another, I would strongly encourage those who are seeking to make a speech to resist making an intervention as well. It simply won't be fair in this debate to have 2 bites of the cherry. I call on Mark Menzies to move the motion.
For your guidance at the start of what is a well-attended debate. Many honourable and right honourable members have been emailed by constituents asking them to come along and support Mark Menzies in this debate. If it's any consolation to members, I too were emailed by constituents asking me to go along and support Mark Menzies in his debate. So to those constituents, I can assure them that I am supporting Mark Menzies in his debate. Mr Hollowborn, shale gas is something that, throughout my time as Member of Parliament, I have lived with. I've seen a number of sites in my constituency be developed, sites be developed and then abandoned, and I could talk about this for quite some time. And when I was elected in 2010, it did come as a surprise to me that the previous Labour government, back in 2008, had awarded a shale gas exploration licence for the area that covers my constituency and some of some of my neighbours. And it wasn't something at the time that was terribly well known about. The level of awareness was quite low. In fact, the company themselves didn't even have a website. So to try and find out what was going on took some bit of doing. But since its introduction in the UK, shale gas extraction has become a contentious issue. Individuals on both sides have offered impassioned arguments for their case, and it's something that I've witnessed throughout my tenure as a Member of Parliament. But today, Mr Hollowborn, I want to focus largely on the proposed planning changes that are currently out or have been out for consultation. And I will give way. Yeah.
I thank him for giving way. Just a very quick intervention. Does he think that this is actually worthwhile? Because is there enough in the way of layers of schist in this country to make it profitable, or indeed to get enough gas out of it, unlike, say, the vast expanses of the European plain?
Well, the companies concerned argue that there are substantial reserves of shale gas. The issue and the difference between the United Kingdom and, for example, large swathes of America is population density. We are not Dakota or rural Pennsylvania, where you can travel for hundreds of miles without seeing a farmhouse. I'll give way to my honourable friend. Alex.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Most grateful to my honourable friend. Actually, my honourable friend strikes an important point there, because it's not just about population density, it's about unique areas. In my constituency, the villages of Allerton, Bywell and Great Preston have many unmapped mine shafts, and there's a real concern with exploratory license being granted that, looking at the situations happening in Lancashire with seismic movements, whether in these areas where you've got unmapped mine shafts, would those seismic movements cause collapses, cause sinkholes at the top, and therefore deciding this at the local level is more important in these sort of planning applications.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Mr Hollowborn. I think Mr Shelbrooke's point was well made. But let me just make some progress, and I will take some more interventions. And as the Minister is aware, the Ministry, or the Department of Housing, Community and Local Government have recently held a consultation on their proposals to bring applications for non-hydraulic fracturing sites under permitted development rights. And in addition, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy simultaneously held a consultation into proposals to bring the production phase of a site under the National Significant Infrastructure Project, NSIP. I recognise the current issues surrounding development of shale gas sites. The Government concerns that it takes local mineral rights authorities far too long to consider planning applications. It does carry some legitimacy. It originally took Lancashire County Council 12 months to consider each of the applications in my constituency. It was then a further 15 months after appeal before a decision was made regarding Preston New Road. Just one sec, regarding Preston New Road. And no decision has been made on the Rosica Wood site some 4 years on. I give way to Honourable Lady.
For giving way and for bringing this debate on this really important subject. Would you like to comment on the fact that Lancashire County Council voted against this planning application and the fact that it was actually overruled by government?
Yeah, and I'll touch on this a little bit more. The situation in Lancashire, particularly with Preston New Road, was slightly more nuanced than that. In the officers' recommended approval, councillors voted against. But the issue we're having here is that we're kidding ourselves if we think these decisions are currently taken locally. Overwhelmingly, they are not. They end up being called in. By the planning inspector. It runs to sometimes more than one planning inquiry for some of these sites that run on at enormous expense, are incredibly complicated, and then the decision is taken out of local people's hands. So the situation at the moment is fully flawed. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman. Yeah.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and thank him for securing this debate. That's the very heart of it, and we have heard evidence at the Housing Committee's Local Government Select Committee about the arguments about addressing this and picking it up as a piece of national infrastructure, and it should be treated the same. But aren't we denuding our local democracy in this very process in a way that we try and respect our democracy here? It is so important, particularly in this current climate, that people locally are heard.
Yeah, I mean, the gentleman's absolutely right in the point that he has made. So yes, I will.
For giving way, he's being very generous. Is he aware of the recent comments of the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Civil Society, the Honourable Member for Chatham and Aylesford, when she said, "We need people power more than ever"? And she then added, talking about the government's civil society strategy, "We will put communities at the centre of decision-making." If the government are being consistent, shouldn't local communities have more say in fracking matters and not have their voice taken away?
No. Again, my honourable friend from East Yorkshire makes a very, very valid point. If I can just sort of make some progress, and I will honestly try and be generous with interventions. It simply cannot be the case, Mr. Hollowbone, that decisions taken on this that are taking so long are simply now being sped up by the government introducing applications under permitted development rights. What we are talking about here, when we are talking about exploration sites, it can sound a little bit innocent. The scale of what an exploration site looks like is really quite something to behold. Yes, I will. Yeah.
He referenced earlier in his comments rural Pennsylvania. I went out to rural Pennsylvania in 2015 to look at this particular issue. I came back with a distinct impression this can be done in a way that's sensitive to the countryside, but needs careful planning, and North Yorkshire County Council developed that plan. The concern which restricts proliferation and density. The concern here with NSIP and permitted development is you'll ride a coach and horses through those restrictions, and we do need to restrict development for shale as it's rolled out.
And again, sort of the member for Luscombe Malton has got experience like I have of dealing with this in his own constituency. I'll give way to the member for Blackpool South. Yeah.
I'm very grateful to the honourable member for giving way, and he has the end of Preston New Road. I have the beginning of it, and therefore I have an interested constituent neighbour. But I mean, if I may just take him up on the point about Rosica Wood, which he's just referred to, is not the point, and this is a planning issue. This is not about broader issues. Is it not the case that purely and simply on the experience of what's happened with the traffic planning in terms of Preston New Road, that the position that Lancashire County Council took on that basis and the local residents' concern, which I'm sure he's had on that, on planning terms are considerable. And is it not regrettable, therefore, that no minister, as far as I'm aware, let alone the Energy Minister, who took the previous debate, and we're now told by The Guardian, has been going around talking to companies about how they should be fracking advocates around the world, hasn't actually taken the trouble to come to Lancashire and actually see what was going on there.
Again, the member for Blackpool South makes an incredibly valid point, and I will return in some more detail to Preston New Road and the issues of traffic in a few moments. But I really do want to make some progress. I'm three-quarters of the way down my first page, and I have been very generous with giving way. I, along with many colleagues here today, Mr. Hollowbone, have made submissions to both these consultations, making clear my constituents' opposition to these proposals, a position which is echoed very much whenever I speak to colleagues across the House. I've called this debate today to further discuss this issue, as well as raising the general matter of local involvement in major decisions, such as the approval of shale gas sites. Under permitted development, currently proposals for shale gas exploration are subject to requirements of the Town and Country Planning Act in 1990, which is administered by the Mineral Rights Authority for the area in which the proposed development will be located. The decisions taken are based on the National Policy Planning Framework and include consideration of the operational impacts of the site, traffic management concerns, visual impact, and the effect of nearby heritage features, amongst many other factors. If we were to move to a system whereby proposals for non-hydraulic fracturing shale exploration development are decided under permitted development rights, this would no longer be the case. But I will give way. Yeah.
Mr. Holloway, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. I declare myself as a fracking sceptic, if not an opponent. Would you agree with me that to try and change, I mean, notwithstanding that, would you agree with me that trying to change the planning regime now, with the heritage that we already have on this issue, doesn't, in my book, pass what I would describe as the sniff test? It doesn't quite have the legitimacy. It seems a sleight of hand and should be resisted.
Yeah. I couldn't improve on what my colleague has just said, and I will give way in one moment, but just let me make some more progress on permitted development. Permitted development rights, as we know, are most commonly used to simplify and speed up minor planning processes around such issues as small property extensions or the change of use of property. Indeed, I was a parliamentary private secretary in DCLG at a time when we looked to relax permitted development rights on home extensions and conservatories. And even then, the department had to roll back from its original proposals, because even changes on that scale, the impact, particularly in urban areas, was there for all to see. But what these rights are not suitable for are new and substantial developments, especially those significant and ongoing operational activities associated. As the Minister knows, I have extensive knowledge of shale gas development, with the first horizontal wells in the UK within my constituency. These are not small or straightforward developments by any means. They are major industrial sites, which require construction of substantial infrastructure to set up and countless vehicle movements to operate. Indeed, if I may indulge the chairman and take him through some examples. Under the permitted development, under the site, taking Preston New Road as an example, we have got thousands of tonnes of hardcore piled on top of double-layered polyurethane membranes, big trenches dug around what is up to a 2-hectare site, 30-metre drilling rig, 2-metre high perimeter fence, 4.8-metre high bunding and fencing, several cabins of 3 metres in height, acoustic screening of 5 metres in height, lighting rig of 9 metres in height, 2.9 high-power generator, 2 water tanks of 3 metres in height, 10-metre high emergency vent, an access road off a busy main road, and I could go on. Now, who on earth thinks that is equivalent to building a little extension on the side of your bungalow? It isn't. I'll give way to the...
Thank you. I thank the honourable member for giving way, and I'm very grateful to him for initiating this debate. On that point, he's just described something which is hugely disruptive and we know is hugely unpopular. Does it not strike him as odd that we would subject that enterprise to permitted development while at the same time making it almost impossible for the erection of new onshore wind turbines, something which has been subjected almost entirely rightly, in my view, to local control. Does that not strike him as being inexplicably inconsistent and give the appearance of a policy that's driven more by ideology than anything else?
The inconsistencies in this are there for all to see, and I really would appeal for government to start approaching this in a sensible and consistent manner, whether we're talking about onshore wind or the shale gas sites that we're talking about today. Let me just make some more progress, and I will. They are certainly not appropriate for all locations. Again, this is something I've personally experienced with, in addition to Quadrilla's Resources site at Preston New Road. Proposals were also received for a other site within my constituency at Rosaca Wood. That application is currently with the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, so I appreciate the Minister will be constrained in what he can say with regards to that today. But following its refusal by the Local Mineral Rights Authority and the decision going to a planning inquiry, it was then further turned down. But that site, under permitted development, would have been allowed to go ahead. And one of the reasons why it was turned down is it is in an area with very narrow roads. The traffic management plan, no matter how many times the company tried to cut it and recut it to get it through a planning inspector, was shown to be not able to stand up to any form of scrutiny. I myself have gone with local people down these roads where in one case they hired an HGV of a similar size to what would be taking product to and from the site, and you could see that it was actually downright dangerous. The road simply was not designed to take those size of vehicles or that volume of traffic, and I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
Could I thank the honourable gentleman for that? He's quite right about the inconsistency in all of this. Is he aware that the government have put out a press release today saying that shale gas developers could be required to consult local communities even before submitting a planning application following the launch of the latest government consultation? This is the most inconsistent, confusing things that I've seen in all my 35 years in Parliament. The government clearly don't know what's going on in terms of that. I think they'd be much better withdrawing all of this and sitting down with experts to talk about the issues around fracking and how it's going to affect constituencies like mine. It is quite clear that the government are all over the place in terms of consulting on this industrial process.
Yep. I thank the member for his intervention. If these concerns hold such significance that local people who have got local knowledge, these are not NIMBYs. They are people who approach this in a very level-headed way, but they know that some of these sites are clearly not suitable.
Well,
I will in a second, but under permitted development rights, developers can rock up, develop these sites in the way in which I've outlined, and people will feel done to. But nor have you got the ability to, even if that site was considered to be suitable, have you got the level of scrutiny involved to look at operational matters, to look at traffic management plans, to look at matters that can maybe alleviate some of the visual impacts. That would all be mitigating factors under a normal planning process, but that is not what's being put on the table under this consultation, and that is one of the reasons why I strongly oppose it. I'll go to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for that. Would he agree with me that these concerns are from very ordinary, general people? They're not organised protesters, they're people that live in these communities, and they are fearful that their rural communities will become industrial communities.
Look, absolutely right. And throughout recent years, the government has put areas of protection into areas of outstanding natural beauty. So if the government recognises that they are not acceptable developments for areas of outstanding natural beauty, what about the rest of the countryside? And it's very important that, taking this point of consistency, that we approach this in a sensible, constructive, well-planned out way, and moving to permitted development is nothing short of irresponsible and downright bonkers. We cannot. Yes, I will. Yes.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member giving way, but when local authorities have developed policy based on their analysis of the impact that fracking will have, surely their voice counts, and particularly when it's backed up by the voices of local people overwhelmingly saying that this will be a disaster for the local community.
Absolutely. And the member for Thusk and Malton referred to some of the planning experiences that working with North Yorkshire County Council at Kirkby Misperton. And I will try and sort of get on to that now. The second consultation, which was out there, was the changes to bringing shale gas production sites into the NSIP regime. And I can see some of the advantages and some of the benefits of that. For me, one of the really important aspects is to get consistency in decisions taken across the country. So, for example, in Kirkby Misperton, they put in what was, I think, an incredibly a very sensible addition. It was where they added in, I think it was 400 metres or half a mile between the shale gas exploration site and residential properties. There were no such conditions placed on either of the sites at Preston New Road or indeed for the application at Rosica Wood. And when you have planning inspectors, and there are different planning inspectors all the time, taking these rulings and these decisions and then going up to the Secretary of State, time after time you're seeing inconsistencies in decision. And so what I would actually ask the Minister to do is to see how the planning process for this. So let's take permitted development off the table. I mean, it's an absolutely cracker's idea. But let's look to see how we can move to a regime where we have got consistencies in place, that we are avoiding some of the decisions that are going against local communities, that ignore traffic issues, that ignore population density, that ignore the proximity of residential houses, and that we come up with what is a workable framework. For example, there are no rules and there is no... Sorry, yes.
Enjoying the honourable gentleman's speech hugely. This debate is only 1 hour long, and he's already had 1/3 of the time.
Yes.
There's only 15 minutes of remaining backbench time left. I have 8 people at least seeking to speak who are going to be speaking for less than 2 minutes each. So if he feels it appropriate, it's his debate, but he might want to think about bringing his remarks towards a close.
Mr Hollowbone, your words are echoing in my ears, and I will, sort of condense this down to allow other honourable members in. But I have been very generous, as I hope you recognise, in taking interventions. I will take one last intervention and then make some progress.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and I congratulate him on securing this debate and for the powerful representations he's making on behalf of his community. Is he aware of the wider concern? The latest polling shows just 18% of the public support fracking. And does he think that many people watching this debate, like my constituent who's anything but ordinary, Etienne Stott, who asked me to attend today, when he says, can you tell the Minister that fracking is a terrible idea and he doesn't want the government to be able to bulldoze their misguided policy over local and global concerns? Does he understand why Mr Stott believes that?
I do indeed. But Mr Hollowbone, let me plough on and bring my contribution to a conclusion. I would ask the Minister, from a planning perspective, to look at how consistency in the planning process can be brought in. It's very important that communities are not facing years and years of uncertainty. It's very important that we have consistency. It is very important that the industry also knows where it stands. And it may well be a planning process that, when developed, takes lots of potential sites off the table altogether, so industry can stop wasting its time pursuing sites that, quite frankly, are not suitable. I would also point out that central government's involvement in recent years has brought some benefits. We have seen much more regulation, much more understanding of the industry, and I would commend the government in the creation of the Office of Oil and Gas Authority. And indeed, that was something right from the outset that I called for, I campaigned for, and I pushed on, because you do need an organisation that recognises that shale gas is very different and that can pull together the work of the Health and Safety Executive, Environment Agency, Mineral Rights Authorities, BASE, and so on, and get a level of expertise within government that can help to make sure that this industry, if it does develop, is done so in a safe way. But I would also just like to conclude by saying that one of those changes that came in was the traffic light system, the red, amber, green. And we have seen at Preston New Road in recent days, seismic events being triggered. And 4 of those events have been classed as red events, which have led to a cessation in activity. And I just would put to the Minister that for 6 years, the industry was not approaching me or not approaching anyone to say that this threshold was far too low. We now have calls to say that actually it needs to be a 1.5 or it needs to be a 2 in order to trigger a red event. I'm sorry, but that ship has sailed. You had 6 years in order to make the case for that, and no case was made. And so, with your words, Mr Hollybone, to allow other members in, I will conclude, because I know that there are many other people who wish to speak in this very important debate.
Yeah.
Good speech.
Good.
The question is that this House has considered local involvement in shale gas development. The debate can last until 5:30. I'm obliged to call the first of the front bench spokespeople at 7 minutes past 5 for a 5-minute contribution, then a 5-minute contribution from Her Majesty's Opposition, 10 minutes from the Minister, and then Mr Menzies will have 3 minutes at the end to sum up the debate. 8 members are seeking to contribute. We've got 10 minutes left, so it's basically 1 minute 30 each. Karen Lee.
The Government's proposals to fast-track fracking are a shameful clampdown on local democracy and disregard the autonomy of residents and communities. Under the Government's proposals, councils and residents will be deprived of say on incredibly disruptive work being forced on their area. Communities have already been sidelined in the Government's reckless pursuit of fracking, and in my county of Lincolnshire, which is one of the areas most threatened by long-term fracking, £53 million of Lincolnshire County Council's pension fund is invested in companies associated with shale gas development. The relationship between shale gas industries and government officials at the national and local levels threatens our democracy and our environment, and it must end. Rather than impose an incredibly unpopular and dangerous method of extraction upon communities, the Government should follow Labour's lead and commit to banning fracking outright. Because, Mr Hollybone, shale gas is completely incompatible with our climate commitments. The majority of fossil fuels will have to remain in the ground if we are to have even a chance of avoiding catastrophic temperature rises. And as a 2015 government report found, fracking poses a uniquely damaging threat to our environment, including air pollution, water waste and earth tremors. To conclude, at a time when we urgently need transition to a green economy, this government must abandon its senseless commitment to fracking and stop its undemocratic assault on the power of communities and on local authorities. Thank you.
Chairmanship. My interest in this stems from the village of Marsh Lane in my constituency, a village of less than 1,000 people who have been impacted by an application for exploratory drilling since the end of 2016. I started without any fixed view on fracking, and I stand here to you today to say this proposal on permitted development and this proposal on ANSEP is ludicrous and needs to be stopped, and fracking, in my view, will not work in this country. I am simply not clear in all of the consultation that has run over this summer what we are trying to achieve here, what the problem is, and how we will do it. And as chair of the all-party parliamentary group on the impact of shale gas, we have heard from a significant number of people which say it will be technically extremely difficult, if not impossible, to confuse the planning process in the way that is being proposed by the government. I would urge them, like the honourable friend in this regard from Rother Valley, to withdraw it immediately. And I am also completely unclear as to what we are seeking to achieve as a country through fracking in general. I have not seen any serious objective from the government beyond energy security, jobs and growth, and ultimately whether there is any price reductions, none of which are made clear by the government and none of which can be achieved unless fracking is done at a scale which requires thousands of well pads across places like mine, a well pad in every single village like mine, and people will not stand for it. This needs to be stopped.
My interest in this is that 2/3 of our energy is produced from gas at present. 85% of households across the United Kingdom depend upon gas for their heating, 65% for cooking their meals. Millions of jobs depend upon having gas as an energy source, and we are increasingly becoming dependent upon imports. By the year 2030, 72% of our gas will have to be imported from places where either we cannot guarantee supply or by routes where the gas could be supplied or directed to other sources. And therefore, it seems strange to me that with 50 years' supply of gas already proved to be lying underneath the land of our country, that we do not look for ways of ensuring that we have that energy supply available to us. I don't have time to give away. And for that reason, I believe that the government's proposals are modest. That, first of all, for exploratory wells, there should be permitted developments. If there's full exploitation, it has to go through the full planning process. And of course, there are already other regulatory agencies which will oversee even the exploratory well process. On that basis, and on behalf of the millions of consumers across the United Kingdom who rely on gas, I trust that the government's proposals, sensible proposals, will be adopted.
For securing this debate. So from my point of view, let me be clear, 2 points. I am intensely sceptical about whether fracking is sensible at all, but I'm very clear that the expansion of permitted development to circumvent the normal planning process is disproportionate in my view and potentially counterproductive. So on the issue of the environment, the starting point has got to be that we should be seeking to keep fossil fuels in the ground, in my view. We have obligations under the Climate Change Act of 2008. The only argument that I've heard which gives some potential justification is the potential for this to be a bridging fuel so that we can phase out dirty coal as quickly as possible. The problem is, however, it seems that the science is as yet unproven, and I'll be listening very carefully to what the Minister has to say about whether that is in fact a credible argument. But the second and more, perhaps even more important point is the principle must be that we should only depart from the ordinary standards of consultation with local communities in exceptional circumstances. And it does seem to me that that hurdle is not met here. The point has already been made about the inconsistency that exists. I know as somebody who has sat on a planning committee for a very long time that the most serious applications ordinarily go through the local scrutiny procedure. There's no reason not to do so in these circumstances. I suggest that it's dangerous and could be highly counterproductive.
Thank you, Mr. Hollow. Fracking has been one of the number one issues that my constituents have emailed me about, so that's why I'm here speaking today. Even more than Brexit, and alongside the tree felling programme in Sheffield, another environmental issue. One person said that I asked myself, would I let my family live in a community with fracking? The answer is no. I therefore cannot recommend anyone else's family to live in such a community either. That wasn't one of my constituents, though. That was Dr. Howard Zucker, the Commissioner of Health for New York State. And the New York State Department of Health concluded that fracking should be banned due to significant public health risks that led to a statewide ban on fracking. Some of the dangers that come with fracking health risks include, as we've seen earlier this week, the 1.1 magnitude tremor at the Little Plumpton site in Lancashire. In Oklahoma, a rise from 2 earthquakes a year to an average of 2 a day. One recent study has shown that in Pennsylvania, hospital admissions for cardiology and neurology are higher in counties with more fracking. In a letter to the British Medical Journal earlier this year, signed by Professor Hugh Montgomery, Dr. Claire Gerarda, Dr. Sheila Adams and several other health professionals call for fracking to be halted due to a risk to the health. Numerous studies have highlighted significant risks. For example, a study in December 2014 found that fracking operations use and create chemicals linked to birth defects.
It's a standing, so the limit is now 1 minute. Justin
Right,
Mathers.
OK. On that note, I'll sum up. Those are just some reasons why my constituents...
People, order. The honourable member has finished his contribution.
OK, thank you.
Thank you. Justin Mathers.
Thank you, Mr Holloway. People from many different communities, and as we've seen today, from different political persuasions, have been united by these proposals. Indeed, in my own area, Labour, Conservative and independent councillors have unanimously voted to oppose the government's approach on fracking. We've got an application in my area from iGas which has been rejected by the council, which is going to review and an appeal. But at least in that case, there was a local process. Local people had a say. In future, the government seemed to decide that local people will have no voice at all. Isn't there a real concern about the level of seismic events in Blackpool from just one well? That's just one well. Imagine how many events we'd have if there were hundreds coming through, which local people would have no say about. Isn't that a real local concern that local people should have an opportunity to have those concerns dealt with in a legitimate, open and transparent process? If we are truly going to take back control, that should mean a genuine democratic procedure, not a stitch-up that benefits private interests.
Tim Farron.
Classifying fracking rigs under the banner of permitted development is a subversion of the planning process and therefore a subversion of local democracy. Permitted development was created for conservatories, small extensions and outhouses, none of which, to the best of my knowledge, have ever created an earth tremor, and yet we see the fracking rigs potentially being given rights under permitted development, which is a cynical disgrace. But the subversion of the planning process works both ways. For example, the proposed gas turbines at Old Hutton in my constituency are just a few hundred yards away from the local primary school for a development that is a fraction, just a fraction, below the scale needed for national consideration. Developers very often, as you know, do this in order to put pressure on a local planner, local authority, local communities who might fear saying no because they can't afford the appeal costs. When we're trying to tackle climate change, at the cusp of catastrophic climate change, we need to be making sure all fossil fuels remain in the ground and back local authorities as they oppose the Old Hutton gas turbines and oppose fracking.
Thank you, Mr Holloway. It was the test drilling in my constituency that first alerted to me the concerns of my constituents. Test drilling from what was going on in my neighbour's constituency, the honourable member sitting next to me from West Lancashire, on the town of Formby in my constituency. And many of them have written to me about their concerns about what goes on in the local environment and on their homes as well. And they feel they should have a voice. They should be involved in the decision-making. Sefton Council unanimously opposes this. There will be no fracking approved by the council, but the government has overruled. This is simply not acceptable. We need alternatives to fracking. The science is there. The climate change effects are there. And to those members on the government benches, they have to oppose their own government where it's made cuts in renewable energy. There must be an alternative to fracking. It's got to be renewable and hydrogen. That's the way forward, not to support fracking. Thank you.
The ACLG Select Committee produced a report on the 2nd of July where we opposed both the permitted development approach and also the NSIP regime, both because we believed it would create more contention with local communities and give them less say. We opposed the NSIP regime because we had no evidence at all that it would expedite the process and also that it would destroy relationships between the fracking applications and local plans, such as North Yorkshire, where they've put detailed guidance about fracking into their local plan. It would be completely redundant. Can I just say, look at the two issues together to the Minister. Isn't there something fundamentally contradictory about an approach which says that one stage of the planning process, fracking is so insignificant that permitted development should be allowed, but at the next stage, it's so important that it should be treated as a national infrastructure project? Surely the two aren't compatible in the same sentence. So in the end, please listen to members of Parliament and allow councils to listen to their communities.
Thank you, Mr Holloway. As a Member of Parliament representing a coalfield constituency in Lancashire, fracking is unfortunately a particular and common concern to residents. 6 licences locally have been imposed on the people of Lee who have serious and legitimate concerns about the impact on their environment. And despite the sentiments we often hear from this government, we do have reasons to be concerned. Earlier this year, we heard from Peter Stiles, a former government advisor, who found that fracking in former coal mining areas increases the probability of earthquakes on faults that have already been subject to movement through mining. I hope that in his reply, the Minister will be able to detail what steps he is taking to protect our community, given this vulnerability, and accept the real anxiety this has caused to our region, which has been left feeling singled out by government fracking regime. Ultimately, however, it is totally unacceptable to impose such a chaotic process on communities without giving them a say.
Starting with the SNP, John McNally.
Thank you, Mr Holloway. As always, it's a pleasure to serve under you as Chair for today's debate on local involvement in shale gas development. I have to declare an interest and a non-financial interest in that I'm involved with local groups within my own area. I congratulate the mention for filed on securing this very timely, topical and extremely controversial debate today. As always, he treats everything with a great sense of humour and great knowledge. He addressed the problems, everybody brought them up, and I think most of the members here agree that there is an absolutely huge problem here, and recognise the confusion surrounding these developments. And I particularly like the point on local accidental activists becoming involved and becoming the voice for their own communities. That is an extremely essential point that we should all be listening to. Chair, I would, if you please, just bear with me for a moment or two. I don't need to tell anyone in Scotland that we have some of the world's greatest renewable resources. In fact, it's estimated that Scotland has 1/4 of the entire offshore wind energy potential of the whole of Europe. Same for tidal energy. Incredible figures, Chair. Therefore, these elements, when harnessed, can indeed be seen as a blessing. Chair, with these thoughts in mind, this gives members here an understanding of why in Scotland there is an overwhelming support for renewables and why 99% of respondents to the Scottish Government's consultation were diametrically opposed to fracking. Chair, that consultation received over 60,000 responses in just 4 months. On that point, let me tell you that in my own Falkirk constituency and my neighbouring Linlithgow and East Falkirk constituency, there has been a long-standing and vigorous opposition to fracking. Myself...
Honourable friend give way.
Yes, I will.
I'm grateful for my honourable friend giving way and for mentioning both our constituencies, which have a very long history with the shale industry going back to the 1850s, with many communities built upon the areas where the deposits are, and there's clearly no support for fracking in our areas. Would it not be advisable for the UK Government to follow the lead of the Scottish Government and place a moratorium and stop all fracking from taking place?
Thank you. Absolutely. I totally agree with my honourable friend. Him and I have attended various meetings and screenings about experiences from communities across the world and the consequences of fracking. In February this year, the Dutch Government announced the end of gas exploration in the Netherlands. Companies have been given 4 years to end the extraction process. This decision followed a 5-year moratorium on further development after, importantly, government-funded studies revealed that drilling for gas in the natural gas fields, I'll not get any time, thank you, had led to doubling the number of earthquakes. There was widespread property damage and damage to flood defences. Residents have the right to sue the government and gas field operations for damages. As of July 2017, there has been 80,000 damage claims totalling €1.2 billion. And if I could take it on to our local debate, according to a recent article in the Blackpool Gazette, the number of earthquakes has now been recorded at over 30 in the last couple of weeks. That's an alarm bell should be ringing. Operations should be ceased, according to the local county council's Labour group, saying self-regulation isn't working. I absolutely, totally agree with that. Natasha Engel, the government's shale gas commissioner, has said our laws are stricter than anywhere else in the world. I would advise Natasha to speak with the Dutch Government Economics Minister, Eric Wiebes, who has said that shale gas is not an option anymore. It is over. It is done with. Chair, no law can be stricter than an outright ban. Chair, like of the many events I attended in London and elsewhere before becoming an MP, there is, without doubt, one film in particular that everybody should watch, and that film is called The Bentley Effect. It was a film made by Stop Climate Chaos, which stands out in my mind. It was shown to a packed hall in Trinity Church, Falkirk, about the experience of communities in Australia. It's worth a look for anyone who hasn't seen it and who really wants to see the impact on communities and how it affects them immediately. Chair, in Falkirk, we are at the very start of test drilling for fracking in Scotland. We were there. The people of Falkirk set up a properly constituted group concerned communities of Falkirk and have been running a campaign called Falkirk Against Unconventional Gas and set out their objections in great detail. The reason I mention this, Chair, is I helped to draw up the Community Charter expressing communities' rights and responsibilities to participate in planning processes that could affect community assets. Chair, there are many serious questions that communities have been asking and could and are affected by fracking. Chair, I have only 2 uncomplicated questions, but I would like to hear the Minister's response to them on fracking. What would the government do if house prices begin to fall in the immediate area or the house market slows down? Does the Minister have a plan to deal with this? It's already known that insurance for farmers becomes unrealistic or indeed can be denied. Can the Minister give a reassurance to farmers and growers that the government will cover any loss of business due to perceived contamination of water caused by fracking to crops, etc.? To conclude, Chair, the wishes of the Scottish people are respected by the Scottish Government. The UK Government seems to have an obsession with fracking. Forget it. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship again. I want to start by congratulating the honourable gentleman for securing this debate. It's obviously important and timely given the number of people in the room. Labour is totally opposed to fracking, and it will be interesting to see how the Minister, when he gets to his feet, defends the indefensible. The government is becoming increasingly isolated on this topic. The following organisations and scientists have come out against fracking: Friends of the Earth, Campaign to Protect Rural England, World Wildlife Fund, Greenpeace, Woodland Trust, RSPB, senior scientists, and of course we also know that there's increasing medical evidence, particularly from the US, about the negative impact that fracking has on people's health. Yes, very briefly.
As a Lancashire MP, I was horrified at the government's decision not to overturn Lancashire County Council's decision to refuse fracking. Flies in the face of the government's pretend localism agenda, and the current attempts to meddle with the process doesn't pass the sniff test. And frankly, my constituents oppose this, and really the message should be perhaps the Tories should pinch another Labour policy and ban fracking.
Yeah. Indeed, I just totally agree with my honourable friend. So despite the huge wealth of environmental, medical, geomorphological and other scientific evidence the government is ploughing ahead, this is despite the fact that BEAR's own research shows that just 16% of people support fracking, the lowest since they started collecting data 5 years ago. And Greenpeace have commented that public opinion on fracking is in free fall.
Very briefly give way.
Very briefly.
Would my honourable friend agree that the government can't have it both ways? They can't say they want a national regime, but when it comes to policing the drilling of fracking in Blackpool and the Fyle, they are refusing to pay the cost of that policing from Home Office sources fully and leaving it to Lancashire ratepayers to pay.
Indeed, and my honourable friend makes a very important point. So BEARS conclude that all of the scientific evidence pertaining to possible risks of damage to the natural environment, the risk of contamination to the water supply and safety concerns about earthquakes are to be dismissed. Try telling that to the people of Lancashire. They've had 18 earthquakes recently, increasing in seismic magnitude as each one happens. So it's also interesting that the government is saying to local people who are opposed to fracking that they just need help to understand the process. It's exactly because they do understand the process that people are concerned. And the Honourable Lady, the member for Devizes, has said that she pities local councillors who get an application across their desk because they will shortly have a travelling circus of protesters to deal with. Is that really how a minister should respond to concerns of local people? And I hope the minister will distance himself from those comments today. Now, I'm not sure that the planning system should allow for fracking at all. But what I absolutely know is that the permitted development system is not appropriate for dealing with the complexities of fracking, and neither is the NSIP process, because both of those aspects of the planning system totally ignore the voice of local people. Greenpeace have said that the fracking industry is pulling UK energy policy in entirely the wrong direction, and the public is right to be concerned, and I agree with them. And what a lot of people in the room might not know is that the Department for Housing, Communities and Local Government have today issued a further consultation document on talking to people earlier in the planning process for fracking, as if that is going to stop them opposing. I'll say to the Minister that is just not going to cut it. What the government have got to do is start listening to local people, change track and get planning policies that support renewables, not fracking.
Mr Hollowburn, a pleasure as always, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Fylde, also for securing this debate. It's obvious that he and many members here today have strong constituency interests in this topic and want to ensure, as I do, that local voices are heard as we consider the development of the shale gas industry in the UK. It's clear from everything, because I want to leave space at the end for the honourable member, it's clear from everything that he has said that the recent consultations are of importance and have excited a strong reaction from his constituents and from him and from other members. I would emphasise at the opener, Mr Chairman, that no decisions have been made on whether to bring these proposals forward. The consultations have now closed and the Government is currently considering the representations made before issuing a response in due course. These consultations are part of a range of measures to make planning decisions faster and fairer for all those affected by new shale gas development and to ensure that local communities are fully involved in the planning decisions that affect them. As many members will know, the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government has a quasi-judicial role in the planning system. So I hope members will understand that it would not be appropriate for me to comment on the detail of individual planning applications or decisions on those applications or on local plans today. As members will also know, my remit as Housing Minister in relation to shale gas development is focused on the planning policy and delivering the related manifesto commitments. But given that many other matters have been raised that are beyond my remit, I do undertake to refer them to the appropriate minister, not least my colleague, the Right Honourable Member for Devizes. I won't, I'm afraid. I don't have time. My own friend has highlighted the importance of the community engagement in the planning process, and I can reassure him that we remain fully committed to ensuring that local communities are fully involved in planning decisions that affect them and making planning decisions faster and fairer. These are long-standing principles which I am adamant we will stick to. However, we understand that communities feel that they are often not consulted closely enough before planning applications are submitted by developers to the local planning authority. This can lead to opposition to developments and the longer application process, as he has highlighted. Engagement with communities at the pre-application stage gives local people an earlier say in the planning process and makes developers aware of the issues of importance to the community that may need to be resolved. The planning system in the UK already provides an extensive legislative framework for community involvement. However, I do believe there is scope to do more. That is why today we have published a consultation on whether applicants should be required to conduct pre-application consultation with the local community prior to submitting a planning application for shale gas development. We believe this could further strengthen the role local people play in the process, and we are keen to hear the voices both of industry and of communities. The consultation also seeks views on the process of community consultation that should be required and what stages of shale gas development should be covered. This consultation closes on the 7th of January, and I urge everybody to contribute. Now, moving to the potential changes to permitted development rights. In the summer, we consulted on proposals about whether permitted development rights should be expanded to include shale gas exploration development, including the circumstances in which this might be appropriate. I would like to make clear that any potential permitted development right granted for shale gas exploration would not apply to hydraulic fracturing operations. It would also not apply to the production stage of shale gas extraction. I would also like to emphasise that any permitted development right only covers the planning aspects of the development. It does not remove requirements under other regulatory regimes from the three regulators, the Environment Agency, the Health and Safety Executive and the Oil and Gas Authority. It's important to note that all permitted development rights contain specific exemptions, conditions and restrictions to control and mitigate the impact of any development and to protect local amenity. Any potential permitted development right for shale gas exploration would be no exception to this. A right could include, for example, things like limits on the height of any structure, areas where a permitted development right would not apply, and noise and operation controls. The consultation has sought views on this. In relation to the role local communities and mineral planning authorities can play within the permitted development right regime, our consultation also sought views on whether MPAs should be able to consider specific elements of a development before works can proceed. This is called prior approval process, and this can include a requirement for public consultation. This would also enable local consideration on key matters. Now, there is currently no commercial production from any hydraulically fractured shale gas resources in the UK. However, we believe it is vitally important that we look ahead and understand how best to manage planning permissions for a future state in which there is shale gas production. Therefore, we also consulted over the summer on whether the production phase of shale gas developments should be brought within the nationally significant infrastructure projects, as many members have referred to. In particular, the consultation looked to understand what the appropriate triggers and criteria could be for including production projects in the NSIP regime. I would further like to emphasise that community engagement is fundamental to the NSIP regime's operation. Pre-application consultation with the local community and local authorities is a statutory requirement. Developers are required to consult extensively before an application is submitted and considered, and where the consultation has not been carried out in line with the statutory requirements, the Planning Inspectorate can refuse to accept an application. Local authorities and communities also have the right to be involved during the examination of a project. They can submit written representations setting out their views, which are then taken into account in decision-making. Both consultations ran for 14 weeks and closed on the 25th of October. The Government is currently analysing the representations up to the consultations and will publish a response in due course. Should the Government take forward the proposals, we have committed to conduct further consultations on the detail of the proposed change, and no doubt this debate will provide valuable feedback into that process. In conclusion, Mr Chairman, I'd like to thank the Honourable Member once again for securing this valuable debate. We remain fully committed to ensuring that local communities are properly involved in planning decisions that affect them and making planning decisions faster and fairer. As part of this, we have today, as I said, launched this further consultation on whether applicants should be required to conduct pre-application consultation with the local community. We have also delivered on our manifesto promises to consult on how best to develop our planning processes for both exploration and production of shale gas development, while ensuring communities remain fully involved. We are currently considering the responses from these consultations and will respond in due course.
Thank you, Mr Holloway. And I'd like to thank both the Minister and the opposition frontbench spokesman for the way in which they've approached this debate. The most important thing for me is making sure that local people's voices are heard. It's also really important that we have a planning system that works. And at the moment, there's a concern that local voices may not be heard. Yeah, I'll give way to the Honourable Lady. Yeah.
Thank you. Is the honourable member confident that more consultation will actually produce anything other than as it's happened in Lancashire, where the consultation took place? The local people and local communities, local elected representatives were ignored when the Minister overturned the decision.
Yeah. Let's not prejudge the outcome of the consultation. Let's hope that the Minister and Government have listened to the concerns expressed by members on all sides of the House, and let us see what comes out. I won't give way, if the Honourable Lady, I won't give way at the moment. I'm just very, very conscious, actually, that Mr Holloway, I did give away a lot of interventions earlier on in the main debate, and I just want to draw this section to a close. It's very important for me, though, that we have a shale gas planning system that is functional, that works, that people know where they stand, and that isn't full of inconsistencies, the kind of which we're currently seeing. Also, I don't believe that application after application after application being determined by a planning inspectorate is the route forward. So the planning system at the moment is far from perfect. It is, in some cases, causing extreme distress to local communities where, such as in the case of Roscoe Wood, a decision is still hanging over them over 4 years later. I want a planning system that takes into account some of the wider issues, such as traffic management plans, that takes into account proliferation, so you have not got well pads popping up in a high-dense fashion across areas. I want a planning system that recognises, as they have done in Kirkby Misperton, that there has to be a set limit from residential properties. And that way we will put such restrictions on the industry that there will be swathes of the country that may well contain shale gas, but it is not appropriate to develop it. I promise the Minister that I will continue to work constructively with Government, as I have done over the last 8 years, to try and make sure that the voices of local people are heard, that decisions are taken in a positive and sensible way. And in that light, I really would say to the Minister that moving to permitted development on this, it just sits so uncomfortably, it jars with everything that I believe in, that I hope the Government believes in. I will give way, and I'll also think